My husband can't find his way anywhere. He can't read a map, and turn-by-turn directions only confuse him more. He got lost on our wedding day and turned up so late the ceremony had to be pushed back 3 days. He got lost on our anniversary while a table of food I'd cooked went cold. 8 months pregnant, I fell in the bathroom and called him for help. He sounded frantic on the phone, and then he got lost on the road home, the one he'd driven for 5 years. By the time he reached the hospital, our son had already been taken to the funeral home and cremated. I couldn't climb out of it, and everyone around me took his side. That thick head of his can't hold a road. He wasn't late on purpose. Don't start a fight over it. You'll have another baby. I nodded, numb. Then, on the way to my son's funeral, I found out my husband had sent the driver away and taken a long detour to his assistant's house without a single wrong turn. Grace, the service won't start for a while. I'll run Paige to the airport first. She's got to get back home. Before I could say no, we were already at her door. His assistant slid into the front passenger seat like it belonged to her, and every word out of her mouth landed somewhere tender. See how well I've trained you? You forget the way to my place, and I'll pull your pants down and deal with you. It was only when she noticed me in the back seat that she stuck out her tongue, embarrassed. Sorry, Ms. Ellison. I was joking. I swallowed it and said nothing. And after Owen dropped her off, he lost the route to the cemetery again, and my son's service started half an hour late. Holding that small urn against me, I stopped hoping. So there was someone he could make an exception for. It just wasn't me, and it wasn't our son. I pushed Elliot's urn into Owen's hands and got behind the wheel myself. Neither of us said a word the whole way. Owen looked guilty and pressed a hand to his head as he apologized.
Grace, I'm sorry.
I went over the route last night. I don't know how I thought of the map he'd been studying before bed. The pin he dropped was his assistant's house. Owen really couldn't hold a route in his head. He'd gotten lost countless times since he was a kid, and someone always had to go find him. Before the wedding, our friend Nadia used to tease him about it. Grace is basically your GPS. Let's hope the baby doesn't take after you. Only now did I understand that there were places he could remember. The winding roads had never been the problem. He could sit up all night with the lamp on, studying one route. He didn't spare a thought for the wife crying beside him over the son they'd lost. What was I to him, exactly? At Cedarvale Memorial Park, I lowered the small urn into the grave and couldn't hold back the tears. Right at the heart of the service, in the middle of the remembrance, Owen stood up to leave. Grace, something's happened to Paige. I have to go. Paige Norwood was his assistant. I'd lost count of how many times he'd walked out on me. The prenatal appointment he swore he'd be at, one phone call, and he was gone. Our anniversary, the restaurant booked for months, canceled without a second thought. This time I screamed at him. If you walk out now, we're done. Owen stopped. It's urgent. Don't make a scene. My laugh came out wretched. I'm making a scene? Our son is gone, and his own father can't spare 5 minutes to say goodbye to him? Don't tell me it's company business, Owen. Who else can't handle it? What is so important that it has to be you? Owen bit his lip and hesitated a couple of seconds before he answered. Paige says she's going to kill herself. Something terrible happened to her family. I can't just leave her to it. I cut him off. I gave every driver the day off. You'd be useless anyway. You'd never find the road. Call the police and let them run a welfare check. He left anyway. I stood there alone in black and said goodbye to my son. It was like the pregnancy all over again. I talked to him alone then too. From the first day to the last, I was the only one who ever showed up for him. Once the service was over, I opened the location app and watched Owen cover 300 miles without stopping. A few hours later, the pin settled precisely on Paige's hometown of Foxmere. He hadn't wasted a single minute. Reading the directions must have taken everything he had, because I couldn't reach him for the rest of the night. There was nothing left to misread. I pulled up Vivian Marsh's number. Draft me a divorce agreement. The next day, I went to see Owen's grandmother, and to my surprise, he'd brought Paige home with him. The family traded looks, but not one of them said a word to Owen about it. I'd spent 10 years of my marriage building a career before I decided to have a baby, and then I hadn't been able to keep him. As far as they were concerned, that made me selfish, and every ounce of blame landed on me. Couldn't even hold on to one baby. All that celebrating for nothing. Hurry up and try again. Nobody asked why there'd been water on the bathroom floor. Nobody asked how weak my body still was, or that the stretch marks hadn't faded from my stomach yet. The weight of it pressed down until I couldn't breathe, and I set down my fork. There won't be another one. Ruth Kessler's smile froze on her face, and Owen rushed to soothe her. Grace just isn't ready yet, Grandma. We'll try again in a while. After dinner, he came looking for me. Why would you say that? You know how badly Grandma wants a great-grandson. I turned the pages of the agreement I had drawn up, and inside I was laughing. What exactly did this family think I was? Any child of mine would be born into love, not born because somebody wanted one produced. I held out the papers.
Sign.
If she wants a great-grandson, you can have one with somebody else. Owen choked on whatever he'd meant to say and leaned in to see what he was holding, and then Paige appeared in the doorway. I don't know what he was in such a hurry about. He signed without so much as glancing down, which saved me a great deal of trouble. If anything, it made Owen and me look like the two people sneaking around. His mouth curved without his noticing. You closed that account beautifully, Paige. And you've had a lot on your plate at home. Name whatever gift you want. It's yours. I was on my way out when Paige turned those wounded eyes on me. Could I have your necklace, Grace? My fingers tightened before I could stop them. That necklace was part of a set made for the three of us. Owen had spent forever on it, sketching it himself, standing over the jeweler while it was made. And he didn't recognize it. Give it to her, Grace. You've got a mountain of jewelry. You won't miss one piece. Paige lit up. Something caught in my throat, and every word came out raw. You're sure about that? Only then did Owen lean in and actually look.
Oh.
That one. He hesitated a long moment, then frowned at me. Grace, I already told her she could have it. It's a bad look for a boss to go back on his word. How about I have another set made for you later? My nails broke the skin of my palm. It was the sight of the agreement that steadied me.
Right.
What was left to care about? Fine. How fast I gave in seemed to throw him, and he opened his mouth like he might take it back. I'd already unclasped the necklace, and I pulled the second piece out of my pocket. The bracelet. The third piece, for our family of three. They could have all of it. With the necklace off my neck, I felt oddly lighter, and I got ready to leave that night. Owen actually came after me. Grace, are you angry? I'll buy you a new one. Look and tell me what you like. Every option was from the same collection. He was right. I wasn't short on jewelry. What I was short on was a husband who meant it. He didn't mean any of it, and I didn't want it anymore. I pointed at one at random and went back to our house to pack. I didn't expect Owen to follow me back. He rubbed his hands together awkwardly. I drove behind you the whole way. Paige is doing a lot better, so I sent her home. I didn't answer. I was busy clearing out the nursery. He watched me work, baffled. Why are you tearing it down already? We'll have another baby, and then we'll just have to set it all up again. Even now he thought I was sulking. Of course he did. He'd never been sick every morning for 3 months. He'd never felt the baby move. He had no idea how every small kick had run straight through my heart. It rose up in me all at once, and I made myself not cry. I slept hard that night, and I woke up to find Paige in the house. She dropped straight to her knees in front of me. Grace, please help me. You're the only one who can. I had no idea what she was talking about. Owen tried to pull her up, but she wouldn't leave the floor. Grace, my grandmother is all alone out in that country cemetery. I want to bring her closer to the city. Please give her a home. I reached for the door, speechless. That was a conversation to have with the cemetery, not with me. Owen blocked it. Paige has never asked you for anything. At least hear her out. She looked utterly wounded. Your baby was so small. He doesn't need a whole plot to himself. Couldn't grandma's urn go along one side? The space is just sitting there empty. She wanted my son to share a grave with a stranger. I said no without a second's thought. Her eyes went red. There's nowhere in the city with grounds that peaceful. Grace, please, think about how much I loved her. My answer was final. Never. Owen stepped into my path. Grace, I get a say in this too. Sharing a plot isn't some unheard of thing. Stop being so old-fashioned about it. The words went through me like a blade. I grabbed a fistful of his shirt and slapped him. Say that one more time. Over my dead body. I mean it. Paige immediately put herself in front of him. Grace, take it out on me, not him. Don't do this. I'll take Grandma back to the country if that's what it comes to. I thought that was the end of the whole ridiculous business. That evening Owen seized my shoulders, shaking with it. Paige already backed off. What more do you want? Why would you send her a letter like that? That boy was unlucky to get a mother like you. No wonder he didn't make it. I stared at him while the tears came down on their own. What? He hurt himself and softened a little. Look, I know you're angry, but you didn't have to threaten her. She'd already given it up, and now the poor girl can't sleep. I said I was calling the police. I don't confess to things I didn't do, Owen. We're getting divorced. He'd swallowed a setup that clumsy. I thought of our vows, and the way he'd smiled when he made me that promise. If you say it happened, I'll believe you. If you say it didn't, I won't believe anyone else. He still handed that out. He'd just given it to someone else. I used to be his navigation. Now he'd learned every road for another woman, and there was nothing left for me to be. The fight went nowhere. The door cracked shut. Owen was out again, and he never once noticed how little time he spent at home anymore. The day I got back from giving my statement, Dale Pruitt from Cedarvale Memorial Park called me in a panic. "Miss Ellison, there's a crew at your family's plot. They're opening it up for some kind of shared burial. They say your husband signed off on it." My heart dropped, and I was already driving. By the time I got there, they had most of it open. I threw myself at them and shoved one man back hard.
Who are you?
"Get away from him. What do you think you're doing at my son's grave?" Two of them caught me and slammed me down on the ground. "Quit screaming. This is Paige's spot now. We'll do whatever we want with it." They held me pinned there. I screamed for both of them. "Where's Owen? Where's Paige? He wouldn't do this. He promised me it was over." Not one of them cared. I watched them open the grave, lift out my son's urn, and set Dolores Norwood's in the center. They left his ashes off to one side like something they'd finished with. A boot came down toward the urn, and I screamed until my voice tore. "Don't." The urn broke apart, and my son's ashes went up into the wind. I was the only one down there scrabbling after them. He'd been so small. There was barely a handful of him, and the wind took it everywhere. I gave it everything I had and came away with nothing. Something in me went out entirely. They'd already sealed the grave again by the time Owen and Paige came hurrying up. Paige ran at the men and slapped one across the face. "What were you thinking? I told you Grace hadn't agreed. I told you Grandma was staying in the country. You came out here and dug up a grave on your own." They ducked their heads fast. "Our mistake, Paige." "Sorry, Owen. We just figured Grandma couldn't wait." Owen looked at the wreckage, then at my face, streaked and filthy. All I had in my hands was a splinter of the lid. Not one trace of him left. Most of the anger drained out of Owen. He crouched down beside me to comfort me. "Grace, it's already done. Let it go, all right? They know they were wrong. We'll light a memorial candle for him at Starlight Remembrance Chapel." I got up and grabbed his coat, out of my mind. He stepped on it on purpose. "You want it even, Owen?" Then I break her grandmother's urn, and I scatter her too. Paige's eyes filled instantly. "Grace, my grandmother was an old woman. She doesn't deserve that. My cousins run hot, I know, but they aren't bad people. They'd never do something like that on purpose." "So my son was the one who could take it?"
Owen.
"Which of us did you believe?" He hesitated a beat, then quietly moved himself between us. I stared at him, unable to believe a father could stand there and do that to his own child. "For her? You'd go this far for her?" Owen frowned. "I just don't want this getting more complicated than it already is. Everybody loses. What's done is done. Let it end here, and we'll call it even for the letter." I bit through the inside of my cheek and shoved him off me. "I told you I didn't send the letter. I filed a report. Nobody touches my son's ground again." Then I took a tire iron to the car we'd ridden away from our wedding in, and I drove off without looking back at his face. 3 days later, guilt had Owen studying every street around the neighborhood. He was working up to surprising Grace with it. He came home to an empty house. Paige's call came through in a panic. "Owen, the cemetery is saying I have no burial rights here." Did Grace hand the plot back? A crew showed up, wouldn't explain anything, and started pulling the urn out. "My grandmother's ashes. You have no right to scatter her." Owen stood there blank for a long while, and for some reason almost nothing Paige said reached him. She had to say his name several times before he answered at all.
"What?"
She repeated it through tears, and he finally agreed to come out. By the time he got there, it was already finished. Paige lay across the grave, sobbing so hard she couldn't breathe. "Owen, that was my grandmother. You have to do something. What kind of person plays games with the dead?" Something in his chest lurched. His son had gone the same way. So this was what it felt like. And he'd only worked it out once Paige's eyes went red. Then, how much had his Grace been carrying? He hadn't answered, so Paige tugged at his sleeve. "Owen." He helped her to her feet. "It's all right. I'll handle it." She wasn't satisfied. This is all Grace is doing. How could she give up the plot without telling anyone? He had no interest in the complaint and brushed it off. "I'll talk to her." Paige bit down on her lip. "That's it? She had my grandmother pulled out of the ground, and half her ashes are gone. I'm not letting that go." She didn't hear a thing wrong with what she'd just said. Owen's face went cold. "You're not letting it go? Then what were you doing telling me to calm down, telling Grace not to make an issue of it, when it was her son on the ground?" She had no answer. She clearly hadn't expected him to turn on her. Her eyes reddened. "Owen, He didn't indulge her this time. He got in his car and drove off. He knew the way home now. There was nobody at the end of it. Something restless crawled under his skin. He looked everywhere and turned up nothing. She'd gone like smoke. Everything to do with Paige dropped clean out of his head. That night, drinking alone, he caught sight of the necklace on the nightstand. He must have been out of his mind to hand away something like that. He called Paige that same hour. "I've had a whole new set commission for you. I want the other one back." Whatever she'd been about to say died in her throat. "You want what?" He repeated himself, impatient. "The necklace you asked for that day. It matters to me. It should never have been handed out as a bonus."
Give it back.
Paige took several breaths before she trusted her voice. "I lost it." Owen came off the couch. "Lost it where?" "I saw you wearing it yesterday." "Never mind. Send me everywhere you've been, and I'll put people on every stop." She sounded small and hurt. "It's so late. Is one necklace really worth all this?" His chest ached with the pressure of it. "It's worth it." She was upset, but she put the list together anyway, and she kept pushing him about the cemetery. "I only got part of Grandma's ashes back. You're really not going to fix this for me?" Owen frowned. Paige always talked like someone who needed rescuing, and that tone had walked him into solving more problems than he could count. He'd admit it. Somewhere along the way he'd started feeling something for her. But it was a flutter, nothing more. Nowhere near enough to stand in for his wife. Put some distance between them, and it would fade out on its own. He gave her a vague answer, forgot it before the call ended, and told the company to transfer her to a branch out in the middle of nowhere. He wanted everything back the way it had been. When Paige found out about the transfer, she threw the door open on a meeting he was still running. "What is this supposed to be, Owen? A transfer? You promised me a promotion. What kind of future do I have at a branch like that?" He looked at her without any warmth at all, then quit. She stared at him as she'd never seen him before. It was probably the first time she had. For a long moment, she couldn't get a word out. Even the people around the table started glancing at each other. What happened between him and his assistant? Weren't they practically family?
No idea.
Word is she ran his wife off. Say what you want, an affair's an affair. Doesn't matter how respectable she dresses it up. The color came and went in her face. "Owen, you." The silence in the boardroom hardened until you could hear the air conditioning humming in the vents. Paige stood frozen near the head of the mahogany table. The flush on her neck crawled up into her cheeks, turning a violent, splotchy red. She opened her mouth to manufacture another tremble, another delicate wobble of the chin that had bailed her out of every blunder for 2 years, but Owen didn't look up from his tablet. "Pack your desk by noon," Owen said, his voice flat and dry as chalk. "Security will hold your badge at the desk. Any severance will go through legal." "Owen, get out." She didn't run this time. She didn't drop to her knees. When the room realized the boss wasn't going to soften, several department heads lowered their eyes, shuffling papers to give themselves an alibi for not intervening. Paige caught the shift in the room's temperature. Her chin came up, the wounded doe act, peeling away to reveal something sharp, spiteful, and cornered. "You think you can throw me away after everything?" she hissed under her breath, loud enough for the front row to hear. "You think you're clean in this?" Owen didn't answer. He signaled his chief of operations to continue with the quarterly projections as if she were already a ghost. Paige snatched her leather folder from the credenza, her heels hammering a furious cadence against the parquet floor as she slammed the door behind her. Owen sat through the rest of the 3-hour presentation without absorbing a single syllable. The numbers on the screen blurred into gray smears. Every time he blinked, he saw Grace standing in the ruined dirt of Cedarvale Memorial Park, scraping the dry earth with her bare fingernails, clutching a curved shard of white ceramic. He stepped on it on purpose. The thought hit Owen with the force of a blunt object. At the time he'd told himself Grace was being hysterical, that Paige's family were just uncouth, rough-edged country folk who made an honest mistake. But a man doesn't crush an urn to dust by accident while casually lifting a replacement box into the
Ground.
A man has to shift his weight. A man has to stomp. As soon as the meeting ended, Owen bypassed his office and took the private elevator directly down to the executive garage. He got into his sedan, keyed the ignition, and sat there. For 32 years, his inability to navigate had been a charming family joke. Owen couldn't find his front porch in daylight. Owen needs breadcrumbs to get to the grocery store. His mother had laughed about it. His grandmother had coddled him over it. When he married Grace, she had taken over the map of his entire life. She'd programmed his dashboard, flagged the dry cleaners, highlighted the easiest turns, and driven on every rainy night because he claimed the glare of the wet asphalt confused him. He looked at the dashboard screen now. The GPS was dark. Grace used to update his favorites list every Sunday night. He pulled out his phone and dialed her number. The number you have reached has been disconnected or is no longer in service. His thumb hovered, then dialed again. Same recording. A cold bead of sweat slid down behind his ear. He opened his messaging app. Their thread was gone. She had deleted her profile from the shared cloud. He pulled up their bank accounts. The joint savings had been split cleanly down the middle, penny for penny, exactly 50% transferred out to an escrow holding account under Vivian Marsh's firm. Then he remembered the papers. The documents she had handed him after dinner at his grandmother's house. The ones he had scribbled his signature on while trying to catch Paige's eye in the hall to offer her a bonus. He shoved his car into gear and sped out of the garage, clipping the curb on the turn because he took the ramp too fast. 20 minutes later, he burst through the frosted glass doors of Marsh and Associates, legal partners. Vivian Marsh was at her desk, a fountain pen poised over a stack of contracts. When she saw Owen standing in her doorway, disheveled, tie crooked, breathing hard, she didn't blink. She set the pen down with deliberate care. "You're not on my schedule, Mr. Kessler." "Where is she?" Owen gripped the back of the leather guest chair. "What did I sign, Vivian? What did you have her put in front of me?" Vivian reached into an ivory folder and pulled out a single sheet of watermarked paper, turning it toward him. At the bottom right, bold and unmistakable, was his signature. Above it in crisp 10-point type were the terms: full waiver of spousal support, uncontested division of unencumbered assets, dissolution of marriage on the grounds of irreconcilable breakdown, and immediate surrender of all residential leaseholds to the primary tenant, Grace Ellison. Grace filed the final decree with the county clerk at 8 o'clock this morning, Vivian said evenly. The statutory waiting period was waived due to your signed consent and the lack of surviving dependents. The phrase lack of surviving dependents landed like an axe in Owen's ribcage. "I didn't read it," Owen choked out, his voice cracking. "I didn't know what it was. I was distracted. It's invalid. You can't enforce an agreement signed under false pretenses." Vivian raised an eyebrow, her gaze freezing him where he stood. "You are the chief executive officer of an 8-figure logistics firm, Owen. You sign multi-million-dollar vendor contracts weekly. If you choose to sign a binding legal dissolution of your marriage because you couldn't be bothered to glance at the title of the page, no judge in this state will entertain your buyer's remorse." "She can't just vanish," he yelled, his composure disintegrating. "Where did she go? What address did she give you?" "My client has instructed me that any further communication from you or your family will be treated as unlawful harassment," Vivian said, sliding the paper back into the folder. "And speaking strictly as someone who watched that girl bleed herself dry for 10 years trying to keep you functional, do not look for her. You won't like what you find if you do." "I am her husband." "Not anymore," Vivian said softly. "As of 9:15 this morning, you're just another stranger who couldn't find his way to her." Owen wandered the city for 4 hours. He missed 3 highway exits, turned down 2 dead-end alleys in the industrial district, and scraped his front bumper against a concrete pylon in a gas station he didn't recognize. For the first time in his life, there was no voice over the speaker saying, "Take the next right, Owen, the entrance is behind the brick wall." There was only the mechanical chime of a satellite navigation system he had never learned to trust. When he finally pulled into the driveway of their house in Westlake, the place was pitch black. He walked through the front door. The scent of her bergamot, clean linen, and the faint herbal tea she drank before bed was already fading, replaced by the dry, hollow odor of an empty house. He switched on the light in the nursery. The walls were bare plaster, where framed sketches of woodland animals had hung 2 weeks ago. The crib he had spent 3 weekends complaining about assembling was gone. The rocking chair was gone. In the middle of the bare hardwood floor sat a single cardboard box, sealed with clear packing tape. On top of the box was a manila folder marked Elliot. Owen's hands trembled as he opened it. Inside were the medical records from the night of the fall. He flipped past the triage reports, his eyes catching on the timeline. Grace had logged the emergency call from the master bathroom at 6:14 p.m. The ambulance had arrived at 6:48 p.m. because a localized storm had backed up the southern artery. Owen looked at his own call logs from that night. Grace had called him at 6:15 p.m. He had answered immediately. He had told her he was pulling out of the office garage and would be there in 10 minutes. He hadn't arrived at the hospital until 8:30 p.m. 2 hours and 15 minutes. He had claimed he'd taken the old river turnoff by mistake, gotten turned around near the rail yard, and lost his signal. Flipping further into the folder, Owen found a printout of an automated garage access report from his own corporate office. His car hadn't left the parking structure at 6:15 p.m. It had left at 7:40 p.m. Taped to the back of the report was a receipt from a boutique bakery 3 blocks from Paige's apartment. A custom order of gluten-free tarts, paid with his corporate card, stamped at 6:58 p.m. Owen fell to his knees on the bare floorboards of his dead son's room.
He remembered now.
Grace had called while he was packing his briefcase. He had panicked, yes, but as he stepped into the hallway, Paige had intercepted him in tears, hyperventilating about her landlord threatening her with an eviction notice over an unpaid utility charge. She had gripped his coat, her chest heaving against his arm, sobbing that she had nowhere to go, that her family would disown her if she got kicked out onto the street. Just 10 minutes, Owen. Please. Just come talk to the building super with me. You're so good at handling people. I can't breathe. I think I'm having a heart attack. He had told himself Grace just slipped. She was 8 months along. Women had false alarms all the time. He would fix Paige's crisis in 10 minutes, pick up the pastry, she liked to calm her down, and then drive home. He would tell Grace. Traffic had been snarled by an accident. He hadn't gotten lost. He had simply chosen to be somewhere else. He had repeated the lie about his terrible sense of direction so many times. To Grace, to his mother, to his grandmother, to his friends, that it had become his armor. It was the universal solvent for all his failures. Owen can't help it. His head doesn't hold a road. Whenever he let someone down, he wasn't cruel. He was just lost. And Grace had swallowed it. She had apologized to the doctors for him. She had apologized to the funeral director for him. She had sat in the hospital bed with empty arms and apologized to him because she hadn't been able to wait long enough for him to find his way. A jagged, suffocating sound tore out of Owen's throat. He dropped his forehead against the cardboard box, the cardboard pressing into his skin, and wept into the dark. The summons from the county sheriff's department arrived at Kessler Logistics. 2 days later, 2 uniformed deputies walked into the corporate suite at 10 in the morning, bypassing the receptionist and heading straight for the executive office. Owen was sitting behind his desk, surrounded by property listings he'd been frantically scouring across 4 states, trying to find any trace of an LLC or purchase under Grace's maiden name. Owen Kessler? Deputy Miller asked, pulling a clipboard from his belt. Owen looked up, his eyes bloodshot, his face gray with stubble. Yes. We're here regarding criminal complaint number 4088, B, filed by the management of Cedarvale Memorial Park and the estate administrator for Grace Ellison. The deputy laid out a series of photographs on the desk. They were high-resolution stills taken from the cemetery's perimeter security cameras. In the first photo, Paige Norwood was standing near the entrance gate, leaning into the window of a dark green pickup truck, talking to 2 men in work jackets. In the second photo, Paige was handing an envelope of cash to the driver. In the third photo, time-stamped 90 minutes later, the same truck was backed up to plot 114B. The 2 men were using picks and spades, dragging the marble infant marker onto the grass while Paige watched from 50 feet away, holding a coffee cup. Owen stared at the pictures, the blood roaring in his ears until the room seemed to tilt. The cemetery groundskeeper filed a report for unauthorized exhumation, criminal mischief, and desecration of a burial site, the deputy explained.
The suspects,
in custody, Milo and Keith Norwood, stated they were hired by their cousin, Paige Norwood, who claimed she had power of attorney and spousal authorization from you. I never authorized that, Owen whispered. I swear to God, I never signed
anything for that.
We know, the deputy replied. The signature on the cemetery work permit was a crude forgery of your name. Miss Norwood was arrested an hour ago at an extended stay motel near the interstate. She had $3,000 of company funds in cash and several pieces of unauthorized property. The deputy slid an evidence bag across the desk. Inside the clear plastic was the custom white gold necklace. The pendant, 3 interlocking rings of hammered platinum designed to hold 3 birthstones, diamond for April, sapphire for September, and an unmounted emerald for the boy who was supposed to arrive in May, was scratched along the
rim.
She tried to sell it to a pawnbroker on 4th Street yesterday afternoon, the deputy added. The jeweler's serial number was registered under your wife's
name.
The shop owner flagged it. Owen reached out with shaking fingers and pulled the plastic bag toward him. I lost it, Paige had told him on the phone with that fragile, trembling lilt.
Is
One necklace really worth all this? Where is she? Owen asked, his voice deadly quiet. County jail, holding cell 3. Arraignment is tomorrow morning. Owen stood up, took his car keys, and walked past the deputies without another
word.
The glass partition in the county visitation room was smudged with greasy palm prints. When Paige was brought in, she looked nothing like the polished, doe-eyed executive assistant who had run his schedule for 2 years. Her orange jumpsuit was 2 sizes too large, hanging off her narrow frame. Her makeup was gone, her hair was pulled back in a tangled knot, and her lips were cracked. When she saw Owen sitting on the other side of the glass, her eyes flashed with immediate, theatrical relief. She grabbed the black receiver on her side of the
wall.
Owen slowly lifted his. Owen, thank God, she gasped, pressing her hand against the glass. You have to
Get your lawyers down here.
It's an insane misunderstanding. The cemetery staff lied to cover their own mistakes, and my cousins, they panicked and blamed me because they're terrified of going to prison. You know I'd never do something
Like that.
You know how much I loved your family. Owen didn't move. He held the receiver to his ear and looked at her. He looked at the small, sharp teeth behind her thin lips. He looked at the hard, calculating dart of her eyes as she searched his expression for a lever to pull. The letter, Owen said. Paige blinked. What? The threatening letter you brought to my house. The one that said if you didn't leave the city, someone would make sure your family suffered. Grace sent that. Paige cried, her voice rising in pitch. She hated me from the day I started. She couldn't stand that you had someone at work who actually supported you instead of complaining about your hours. The police ran the postage meter, Owen said quietly. It was stamped on the 3rd floor of our office building. At 8:15 on a Tuesday morning. Grace hasn't set foot in that building in 18 months. You stamped it yourself. Paige's mouth stayed open for a fraction of a second. Then the corners pulled down into a sneer. So what? She spat into the receiver, dropping the frantic cadence entirely. You wanted to believe it, didn't you? You needed to believe she was the crazy
one.
Because if she was crazy, you didn't have to feel like a coward for spending your nights buying me dinner while she sat home with swollen ankles. The cruelty in her voice was so casual, so completely devoid of hesitation that it knocked the breath out of him. Why the grave, Paige? He asked, his voice hollow. Why my son? Paige leaned in close to the glass, her breath fogging the pain. Because as long as that little box was in the dirt, you were always going to go back to her, she said, her eyes dead and cold. You were always going to look at her and feel guilty. I needed that ground cleared. I needed you to look at that plot and see my family, my debt, my hold on you. And you were so stupid.
Owen.
You were so pathetic. You drive 300 miles through a thunderstorm just because I told you I had a bad dream. She let out a dry, rattling laugh. You can't even read a map, you useless bastard. You couldn't even find your way to your own kid's funeral on time because you wanted me to tell you how smart and strong you were. You killed that baby just as much as I did. Owen slowly lowered the receiver. Paige kept talking, her mouth moving behind the glass, screaming soundless curses as the guard stepped forward, grabbed her arm, and hauled her back toward the iron door. Owen didn't wait to watch her leave. He set the receiver on its hook, stood up, and walked out into the pale daylight of the courthouse square. 2 months passed. The Kessler family name vanished from local charity boards and society listings. The corporate board of Kessler Logistics forced Owen out as CEO following the public scandal of the cemetery desecration and the resulting lawsuits.
His
grandmother, Ruth Kessler, suffered a mild stroke from the disgrace and was moved into a full-time nursing facility in another county, complaining to the empty walls that nobody visited her anymore. Owen didn't care about the company. He sold his remaining equity, liquidated his personal investments, and bought a modest 4-wheel drive truck. He hired 3 different private investigative firms. For 8 weeks they came back with nothing. Grace had been meticulous. She hadn't used her old credit cards, she hadn't activated any utilities under her name, and she had severed ties with every mutual friend they shared. Then, on a Tuesday in late October, a single-line item surfaced in a regional trade gazette. A small, independent landscape design studio in Point Reyes, California, 1,400 miles away, had registered a new commercial permit under the name Ellison Living Spaces. Owen didn't book a flight. He got into his truck with an old-fashioned paper road atlas on the passenger seat, and a compass clipped to the air vent. He didn't use the navigation system. He didn't ask anyone for directions. For 4 days and 3 nights, he drove west. Whenever his vision blurred with fatigue, he forced himself to stay awake. Whenever he missed a turn on the mountain passes of Colorado or took the wrong junction across the Nevada desert, he didn't call for help. He pulled over to the gravel shoulder, turned on the dome light, traced the red lines on the paper map with his thumb, and turned the truck around himself. He missed turns. He ran low on gas. He drove 40 miles in the wrong direction, through the salt flats before catching his error. Every wrong turn was a lash across his back. Every mile of asphalt was a confession. I could have learned, he thought, his knuckles white against the steering wheel. I could have sat down and learned the roads 10 years ago. I could have learned the road home from the office. I could have learned the road to the hospital. It hadn't been an illness. It hadn't been a defect in his brain. It had been vanity. It had been the luxury of a man who knew someone else would always do the driving, someone else would always carry the compass, someone else would always wait at the door with dinner warm on the stove while he wandered, wherever his ego took him. On the 5th morning, the Pacific Ocean opened up before him beneath a high, clean ceiling of autumn fog. The studio was set back from the coastal highway behind a windbreak of salt-stunted cypress trees. It was a low, wooden building with broad skylights and a gravel yard filled with native grasses, coastal boulders, and cedar planters. A silver wind chime hung from the eaves, ringing with a light, clear note in the offshore breeze. Owen parked across the Tulane Road and sat in the cab of his truck for an
Hour.
The ocean air was cold and damp, carrying the sharp scent of brine and wild eucalyptus. At 10 o'clock, the front door of the studio opened. Grace walked out carrying a wooden tray of small potted succulents. She was wearing a thick gray knit sweater with the sleeves pushed up to her elbows, dark denim jeans, and heavy work boots dusted with dry potting soil. Her hair, which she had always kept ironed straight to please his mother for company dinners, was cut short to her collarbones, curling loosely around her ears. Her cheeks were flushed with the sea wind. She looked rested. She looked solid. She set the tray on a cedar potting bench and reached for a pair of brass pruning shears. Owen stepped out of the truck. His knees were stiff from days behind the wheel, his back aching, his clothes rumpled and smelling of diner coffee and diesel smoke. The gravel crunched under his boots as he crossed the road. Grace didn't startle. When she heard the footsteps, she finished trimming a dry leaf from an aloe stalk before she turned around. When she saw him, her hands didn't shake. Her eyes didn't widen. There was no scream, no tears, no flare of ancient fury. There was only a flat, terrifying stillness. "Grace," Owen said. His voice was cracked, raw from days of silence. "You're trespassing on commercial property, Owen," she said.
Her voice was
steady, perfectly modulated, like someone addressing an unfamiliar delivery driver. Owen reached into his coat pocket and pulled out a small velvet box. He held it out with both hands, his fingers trembling. "I found it," he said. "The police got it back from Paige. It's the set. The whole set. I had the jeweler in Chicago clean it and fix the platinum links.
I
have the bracelet too." Grace looked at the velvet box in his hands. Her expression didn't change. "Throw it in the ocean," she said. "Grace, please. Just 5 minutes." Owen took a half step forward, his eyes filling with tears. "Paige is in jail. Her cousins are in prison. The company, I lost the company. I gave it all up. I drove here. I drove 1,400 miles. By myself, Grace. I didn't use a GPS. I read every road sign. I learned every state line. I can find my way now. I swear to you on our lives, I can find my way anywhere you want to go." Grace looked at him for a long moment. She laid the brass shears down on the cedar table. "Do you know what today is, Owen?" she asked softly. Owen hesitated, his mind racing through calendars, anniversaries, corporate
dates.
"It's November 12th, Grace said. "It's the day Elliot was supposed to have his 6-month checkup." Owen's mouth opened, but no sound came out. "You think you drove 1,400 miles to prove something to me?" Grace walked around the potting bench, stopping 4 feet from where he stood.
You
"Drove here because you're still doing the exact same thing you've done since the
day I met you.
You're trying to make me responsible for your progress. No. You want me to look at you, dirty and tired from a long drive, and say, 'Good job, Owen. You finally read a map. You're a big boy now. Let me fix you some soup and tell you you're forgiven.'" Her words were quiet, but each one fell like a stone dropping into a deep well. "Grace, I love you. I never stopped loving you. Paige was a sickness. It was an ego trip. I was out of my mind. I don't care why you did it, Grace interrupted. I don't care about Paige.
I.
Don't care about your company. I don't care that you can read a map now.
That's.
The bare minimum required to be a functional adult on this earth. Owen,
You.
don't get a medal for finally looking at a road sign after your negligence. Killed your son. Owen dropped to his knees in the gravel. The sharp stones dug through his trousers, biting into his kneecaps. Don't leave me alone, he sobbed, the tears running hot down his stubbled cheeks. I have nothing left. There's nothing back there. I don't have a home. Grace looked down at the man kneeling in front of her. For 10 years, she had structured her life around his convenience.
She had.
Carried the emotional weight of 2 people, navigated every turn, absorbed every insult from his family, and blamed herself when his selfish distractions tore their life apart. She looked at him now and felt nothing. Not hatred. Not revenge. Just the clean, cold relief of an empty ledger. Then I suggest you pull out your map, Grace said, and find one. She turned her back on him, picked up the wooden tray of succulents and walked inside the studio. The latch clicked shut. A moment later, the lock turned from the inside. Owen stayed on his knees in the gravel for a long time. The tide was turning down at the shore. The waves crashed against the black rocks with a steady, indifferent rhythm, throwing white spray high into the morning fog. He looked at the velvet box in his hand. He opened it. The 3 platinum rings sat on the black silk, cold and shiny, under the gray sky. He stood up on trembling legs, walked across the Tulane Road, and climbed down the rocky embankment to the edge of the water. The wind tore at his coat. He took the necklace out of the box, held it in his palm for 3 seconds, and hurled it with everything he had into the surf. The metal flashed once in the air, hit the green water, and vanished beneath the foam. He didn't look down to see if it sank. He climbed back up to his truck, opened the door, and sat in the driver's seat. On the passenger's side lay the paper atlas, open to Northern California. There was no destination circled. There was no address written on the margin. He turned the key in the ignition. The engine turned over with a low, steady rumble. Owen put the truck in reverse, backed out onto the coastal highway, and turned south toward the empty road ahead. A year later, the spring rains arrived early along the Point Reyes headlands. The hills behind the studio turned a brilliant, luminous green, covered in wild mustard and blue lupin. Grace stood on the bluffs overlooking the ocean, holding a small wooden bowl, carved from fallen redwood. Inside the bowl were flower petals gathered from the coastal dunes, sea thrift, coastal sage, and white poppy. She looked out over the water. The sky was vast and clear, a pale, endless blue that met the horizon without a single cloud. She tipped the bowl. The wind caught the petals immediately, lifting them high into the sunlight, scattering them across the vast expanse of the open Pacific where no road could ever be built, where no boot could ever tread, where no one would ever have to ask for permission to rest. Grace watched them drift until they were tiny specks of white against the blue, swallowed by the sky. She took a deep, full breath of the clean salt air. Then she put her hands into the pockets of her jacket, turned around and walked down the path toward her work, her boots steady on the open earth, knowing every
single inch of the way.